There is dissension amongst the ranks in terms of whether or not he should step down. How are you talking to other caucus colleagues who may want to see a leadership review or a leadership change?
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone.
Liberal ministers are getting no breaks this week at their press conferences as a result of the disastrous election in the Toronto-St. Paul's by-election. This time, it was Stephen Guilbeault's turn, and he was shaking like a leaf.
Let's take a look.
You're talking about conservation, though, so let's talk about that. How are the Liberals going to be able to save themselves in the next election, given the trajectory after the by-election in Toronto and what that says about the prospects in other parts of the country?
Well, as I said to your colleague from Radio-Canada in French, I think that I'm not a political analyst expert, but I know enough about politics that one should be careful by drawing direct links between a by-election and a general election. And we know that different things can happen in by-election. It's certainly not the result that we were hoping for. And I want to thank Leslie and all of our teams of volunteers who worked so hard. It's not what we were hoping in terms of result, but we have many months ahead of us to continue working to help Canadians and to support Canadians, and I continue to believe that we can do that to get to a result that will be one that we hope for in the next election.
Oh, Liberals, especially these Liberals, and it's interesting because each one of them seems to have their own spin on this. And this is a result of the fact that the House has risen and there's no caucus meetings and they're all kind of off on their own. Contrary to probably popular belief, the MPs aren't, buddy with each other. Like they barely actually know each other.
Yeah, it was actually quite surprising to us, when we started talking with our MP and we'd be like, oh, do you know so-and-so? Do you know so-and-so? And really they don't interact with each other very often unless they're on the same committee together or perhaps they're working on a bill together. But if you think about it, each caucus is kind of like a small company of 100 or more people. And do you know absolutely everybody at a company that size? Probably not. You might know some names, but you're not really buddy or friends with them unless they're in your department. So it's very similar within caucus.
So most of the people that the MPs are actually dealing with are actually their staff in their office. Or, as Tanya said, if they're on committee together, you're maybe prepping for, how you're going to approach specific meetings or that sort of thing. But even then, if you're on the Conservatives, that's maybe 4-5 people.
Yeah, out of what is it, 119 now?
118, I think.
Yeah, it's a lot.
So that's the interesting thing. So as a result of this, the Liberals are actually in a very precarious position because they don't have a message that they're being consistent with. Behind the scenes, no doubt Mr. Valaket, the Director of Liberal Communications and, Chief Minister of Wokeness, is trying to craft something and distribute it between all the staff and the ministers and the cabinet so they're kind of on the same message. But clearly that hasn't really happened yet because you have Karina Gold saying one thing, you have Freeland crying at another, and you have Guilbeault and Miller, and everybody is just on their own and they're all floundering.
To your mind, Minister, what are the deepest challenges within the Liberal Party right now?
I think, as a government who's been in place now for many years, and as a government that was in place during the pandemic and is in place post-pandemic, we're seeing that people are struggling. We're still suffering the impacts of the pandemic, whether it's supply chain, interest rate, inflation, and it's not just in Canada. Some people would like you to believe that it's only happening in Canada. Look around. Look what's happening in Europe. Look what's happening in the United States. Look what's happening in Japan or other other parts of Asia or South America. And many peoples are struggling. And one of the ways that they're expressing their anger and frustration, understandably, is towards their leaders. People are mad at their leaders, understandably. I think what we need to do as a government is to continue to work to help Canadians, what we're doing with dental care, what we're doing on housing, what we're doing on the environment. And I think we can prove that we're there to support Canadians. And some months from now, we will be able to have different conversations with Canadians.
So, okay, so there's a few things there. So he says, well, with everything going on, people are angry at their leaders. Yeah.
Yeah, because you guys are supposed to lead us through stuff like a pandemic.
That's literally your job. But, anyway, so that's the first thing. The second thing is he's saying, well, people would like you to believe that this is only happening in Canada. And then he cites Europe and the United States. Well, let's talk about the United States. The housing costs in the United States are like half of what they are here, and we have way more land
and way less people.
Right. So we should have much less demand than the United States does, one would think. And they have also far more people coming into their country. But their rent is far lower. Their housing is far lower. So there's no excuse there, and there's countries all over the regions that you're talking about that have fared a lot better than Canada in terms of cost of living. Yes, inflation, was an issue, but they managed inflation differently. We managed it by opening the vaults, printing money, and saying, hey, everybody, interest rates are at historic lows, Glenn.
Interest rates are at historic lows, Glenn.
And look at the result. And then he says, well, we've basically been in government for a number of years, but people will have to wait for a number of months. And then we can have a different conversation. And then we can tell them what a great job we've done over the last number of months. Forget the last 9 years. Don't worry about that. Forget all of the disasters. Forget all of the scandals. Forget all of the corruption. Forget all of that. Just look at the next couple of months and then, evaluate us on that and then give us a free pass.
Yeah, it's almost like he's saying, forget all of the struggle and all of the horrible things Canadians have been through under this government in the past 9 years. That totally wasn't a representation of what we did. Just compare the next couple months between now and election and vote for us again, and we promise we'll do better.
What a joke.
Minister Guilbeault, the Prime Minister and other ministers have said that you are prepared to listen to Canadians and that you are learning from this by-election loss. In regards to listening, the majority of provinces are against the carbon tax. And is this something that is going to be under consideration for your government to roll it back and hit pause all across Canada, given that you've already done it in Atlantic Canada, given that you are not going to penalize individuals in Saskatchewan for not paying the tax? Will that be a consideration when we talk about making a policy that impacts Canadians immediately that they can feel?
Guilbeault is so funny. He is such an activist that as the reporter started bringing up the possibility of repealing the carbon tax, he just started bristling. Like you could see, he was like putting his lips together and it's like, no, must have climate change.
Well, because the Liberals cannot defend this carbon tax. They can't tell us how much it's reducing Canada's emissions, if at all. They can't tell us how much it's costing Canadians, which we know because we see the Parliamentary Budget Officer's assessment. We know that it's costing Canadians more money than we're getting back. I mean, how could it not? The program itself costs $200 million to administer. How can they take tax money from all of us and then magically give more back? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's liberal math is what it is.
So first thing I should say is that the pause that was announced for home heating oil was not only for Atlantic Canada. It's for all of Canada. there are more Quebecers who heat their home using oil than in all of Atlantic Canada put together. So it's not a measure just for Atlantic Canadians.
So basically it screws those of us over in Ontario who use natural gas.
Well, let's stop you right there. Okay, so there may be more people in Quebec that use home heating oil than all of Atlantic Canada, but what's the population of all of Atlantic Canada?
It's low.
And if you look at that, it's what is the percentage of people in Atlantic Canada that use home heating oil? It's a lot higher than every other province. So in terms of the per capita, that's where you're going to have the biggest bang. And that also means that the percentage of voters that are using home heating oil are by far out in Atlantic Canada. So you can say, well, this was, for all of Canada. Yeah, sure, you can say that, but the target where it was going to have the biggest impact was in Atlantic Canada. So you can try and say that all you want, but no, too bad. And Guilbeault didn't even want to repeal it from Atlantic Canada, but Trudeau had to do it because all of his MPs out in that area were screaming for him to do it.
And the premiers.
Yeah, and the premiers. The premiers, Andrew Furey, doesn't even want the carbon tax anymore.
He doesn't even want to be associated with the federal Liberal Party anymore. He's constantly reminding constituents that what's happening in Ottawa is not my fault. I have nothing to do with it.
And the problem is they don't care. They're just like, well, you're a Liberal, so too bad. You're a Liberal, but it's a different Liberal Party. They don't care.
Well, and that's how bad that Trudeau has tarnished the Liberal brand. He hasn't just tarnished the federal Liberal brand, he's also tarnished the provincial Liberal brands.
Despite them being completely separate parties, completely separate entities. So remember that. Every party, the Conservative Party of Ontario, has no affiliation, no link, no nothing whatsoever to the Federal Conservative Party under Pierre Poilievre. So some people have said, well, can't Pierre, force Doug Ford to do anything? No, we cannot, because Doug Ford is at the top. That's it. That's all that's there. There is no chain of command there. It stops at Ford. Okay? Just as in Newfoundland, it stops at Furey. He does not report into Trudeau. He doesn't take orders from Trudeau. So it's just... It's interesting that this gaslighting, ironically, he's gaslighting the environment minister is trying to do right here.
But the reality, and that's been confirmed by the Parliamentary Budget Officer on a number of occasions, it's been confirmed by more than 400 economists, including Nobel laureates, is that where the federal carbon pricing system applies in Canada, families get more money back than what they pay. 8 out of 10 families get more money back than what they pay. So if we were to take this away, we would literally be taking money away from 8 out of 10 families at a time when many of them are struggling. So we won't do that. And the opposition that we're seeing by some provinces to carbon pricing is political. It's not based on facts. And I've yet to see a piece of analysis other than slogans by Pierre Poilievre or others that proves that 8 out of 10 families aren't better off, and they are. So we will continue moving ahead because the reality is that climate change is costing Canadians billions of dollars. 10 years ago, the average cost to Canadians on an annual basis was about $200 million because of natural catastrophes. It's gone up to $2 billion, and that was before last year. Well, last year will be north of $3 billion. This is money we're all paying for, whether it's provincial governments in compensating for flash floods or droughts or forest fires, whether it's the federal government, whether it's the municipal government, where infrastructures are being surtaxed. We're paying the price for climate change, and unless we do something about it, the price tag is only going to continue to go up.
So let's suppose this Liberal math is correct, that families, 8 out of 10 families get more money than they are paying into the program. And let's keep in mind that the program itself costs $200 million to administrate. So where's all this money coming from?
Well, and the other thing is that they have only paid a very small percentage of the carbon tax back to small businesses as well.
Right, and that's supposed to be where that 2 out of 10 is going, is to the small businesses. So those 2 out of 10 families that are not getting money back, it's supposed to be going to the small businesses. So suppose all that math is correct, and somehow magically Canadians are getting more money than they're paying into this program, and also this $200 million administration fee is just appearing out of thin air magically. That means that the government is printing money. And we all know what happens when the government prints money. Inflation goes up and everything costs Canadians more. So no matter how Guilbeault tries to slice and dice this money's not just coming out of nowhere. Canadians are not just magically getting more money in their pockets. Either we're not getting more money in our pockets because the carbon tax is costing us more than we're getting back in the rebate, or supposing that he's telling the truth and that we are getting more money back, then the government is creating money to give it to us back. And that's creating inflation.
Well, and the biggest issue with this whole thing is they are playing with numbers that are non-verifiable. That's the biggest problem with this whole thing. And I think that's why they've chosen this type of way to do this. Because how in the world are you able to sit there and say, well, implementing the carbon tax has reduced emissions by whatever it is? How can you prove that? How do you prove that I drove my car less? You can't. You absolutely cannot. Just like you can't say, I burned less natural gas. I used my barbecue. How do you do that? You do not have the data to be able to do that. And I challenge you to show it to me. And this is the thing. This is why Guilbeault has not been able to actually show, as a result of the carbon tax in committee, what the effectiveness of this program allegedly is. Now, let's talk about the carbon tax and the cost. So again, you have to be able to do a lot of estimating across a lot of different sectors to be able to then come down to a number as to, well, Canadians are getting more money back. Again, use common sense. 70+% of Canadians do not want the carbon tax. Now, the Liberals will say, well, that's because Pierre. Okay, either Pierre is a hell of a salesman or Canadians aren't stupid, or maybe both.
Well, because Canadians, again, we don't see value for our dollar. I honestly don't believe that this carbon tax is helping to reduce emissions. I don't see how it's helping to reduce emissions. I mean, they've put this carbon tax on us and we're having all these forest fires, which is a completely different problem. But they're making all these outlandish claims that Canadians are having a difficult time believing. And it makes no sense. Like, why would you want to pay a carbon tax for something that you can't prove? And that's kind of where we are right now.
Well, and here's the other point that he said that I wanted to actually refute. So he's saying, well, the cost of catastrophes to Canadians has dramatically increased over the last 10 years. Now, he's trying to say that in a manner which equates Canada of 10 years ago to Canada now. Well, what has changed in Canada from 10 years ago to now?
A lot, actually.
Massive amounts of people that you've brought in, which means massive amounts of new buildings, massive amounts of land that has been either utilized, reclaimed, or expanded in cities, especially in coastal cities, because that's where the vast majority of cities are. So when you have more people in these areas where you get storms, you get hurricanes, and especially in Canada, which, guess what? It gets pretty cold here. So you have all these new people. Well, yeah, it's going to have a higher economic impact because you have more people.
Well, and that's the thing. If you compare Canada's population to 20 or 30 years ago, there's a lot more people.
It's gone up by like 6 or 7 million.
Yeah. So, of course, more people will be affected by things like forest fires and floods and droughts and hurricanes, etc. I don't necessarily know that these events are getting worse. What I do know is that there's more people who are affected by these events because the urban sprawl has gone outward, and so has the rural sprawl. Like, more people are living in areas where they are affected by these natural disasters. So the human cost is higher because there's more humans.
And with everything that we've talked about, this is why nobody believes the carbon tax is effective, because it doesn't make sense. They can't prove it, and they're asking other people to prove it when they can't even prove that it works themselves. So no, that's where the left really has a problem, and that's how you know you're dealing with people on the far left online, is because when they make a claim and you say, well, that's not true, and they say, well, prove me wrong. No, that's not how it works.
We know what ministers are saying publicly in front of cameras about their support for Prime Minister Trudeau, but there is dissension amongst the ranks in terms of whether or not he should step down. How are you talking to other caucus colleagues who may want to see a leadership review or a leadership change?
I can assure you that what I tell you publicly about my support and gratitude, eternal gratitude for the Prime Minister, is the same thing I say when I'm behind closed doors. Same thing, no difference. As Nathan was saying, we've been the last 48 hours very involved in those conversations on nature and biodiversity. I haven't had a chance to talk to many of my colleagues. I have spoken with some of them. None of them none of the members of parliaments or ministers that I've spoken to have told me that they think that the Prime Minister should go.
So I think that's very telling. And he says, well, I haven't really gotten a chance to talk to many people. Those that I have talked to, you know, they think everything's fine. Well, they know that you're really close to the Prime Minister, so why would they tell you anything? But the interesting thing is in our research and screening of a lot of footage, most of it that we don't actually show, whether it be CTV, Global News, CBC, or any of the rest of them, you have all of these journalists from all of these different networks, including CBC, categorically stating that after the Toronto St. Paul by-election was over, they had Liberals coming at them in droves, both staffers, professionals, and MPs, a lot of them backbenchers, saying Trudeau has to go. So there is a really big movement behind closed doors that is saying Trudeau has to go. Now here's the problem. Trudeau has set up his cabinet and his party so that there are no legitimate challengers to his leadership. So who do you replace him with that's going to, you know, do a better job? The problem is this whole party has been ideologically tied to Justin Trudeau.
Yeah, it's been the party of Justin Trudeau. It has not been the Liberal Party. It's been Justin Trudeau's party. In
everything that they do, because they are not behaving like a normal Liberal Party.
No, because the Liberal Party has historically been to the left of the center. This Liberal Party, Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party, has been very far left.
Farther than the NDP.
Yeah.
So that's what you need to actually look at. And this is where I think a lot of the backbencher Liberals that want to get elected again, they're stuck. They don't know what to do. The problem is you need somebody new to come in to drag the party identity back to center left. But how do you do that in a year? And the answer is you can't.
Well, and the other thing, I think the backbenchers can kind of smell the blood in the water. They know that their time is up. If a riding such as Toronto St. Paul's, which has been Liberal for the past 30 years, that's almost as long as I've been alive, if that can flip blue, what are their ridings going to do?